It's May the 18th, 2021, and coming up on this week's episode of This Week, an incredible weekend just passed in Indycar at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the Indy GP. A first-time pole sitter, a first-time race winner, both of whom were different. A great weekend, a great race, an absolute thriller. Also a great race weekend and an absolutely topsy-turvy, weather-affected race weekend for MotoGP in France. There's also news from ELMS, from IMSA, a little bit of WEC news, some NASCAR news, and some Formula One stuff thrown into the mix as well, all coming up this week on this week's episode of This Week. Hello then folks, and welcome back to This Week. Welcome back to my home. I'm sorry I'm not taking you for a walk again, because although the restrictions and the quarantines put in place when we come back from racing has now passed, the British weather has decided to go backwards and take itself back into winter, and it's now absolutely hammering down with rain pretty much every day. So I'm going to stay in home and be nice and toasty and warm before I actually fly today, Tuesday, to Monaco for the Monaco Grand Prix. Everything happening a day earlier, as it always does in Monaco, than every other week. So I'm filming this on the Monday to release it on the Tuesday, which is actually the 17th of May today. But when this goes up online, it will be the 18th of May. So thank you for your support. For your comments and your questions, and I will get round to recording a new episode of Your Questions Answered soon, I promise, because I haven't done one of those for ages, but I do read your comments, I do read your questions, I do appreciate them all. I appreciate every view. If you like what you see, please share, please like, and thanks for buying the merchandise as well. As I said, percentage of those sales going to charities both in the US and the UK. Shall we get started with the news from the week? Let's do that. And I think talking about going to Monaco, by far and away the biggest news of this week, of course, is the Formula One calendar and the fact that the Turkish Grand Prix, which had been brought in to replace the Canadian Grand Prix, well, that Turkish Grand Prix became incredibly difficult to be held because the British government put Turkey on a red list of countries, meaning that with the majority of Formula One teams, personnel, being based in the UK, they would have had to have been on the road for 6 weeks or more to have made that race viable. France has stepped up to the plate and moved their race a week earlier. We'll then move to a double header in Austria. So really just incredibly impressed with how proactive F1 has been in finding a solution to this problem. Proactive, swift, and as I understand it, Turkey, there may still be a route for it to come back later in the year, possibly if another race somewhere down the line doesn't happen. But for now, it is France, then a doubleheader in Austria. Now, coming out of the last race in Spain, some noises coming out from, Lewis Hamilton saying that he thought that Max Verstappen's rear wing was flexing in the Grand Prix. Some talk around the paddock of other teams, not just Red Bull, having wings that flex. I'm sure you've seen videos online of what is purported to have happened. Anyway, during the week, the FIA wrote to the teams saying that the static load test that the rear wings are placed under would be sort of strengthened up a little bit moving forward. And it's not just going to be vertical and horizontal movement that it's checked for, but also angle. So the sort of the angle of rotation that will be checked as well. Red Bull insisting that even if these changes come into force, they don't think it will affect them all that much or their pace over race weekends. So small little change there, but interesting nevertheless. Some teams stayed on in Spain after the last Grand Prix to test the new for 2022 Pirelli 18-inch tyres. Pirelli now stating they believe they are 80 to 90% happy with the direction that they're going to take with where these tyres will be for next year. Of course, larger wheel rims. We'll see wheel rim covers coming back to Formula One. This is in order to help the teams to maintain tyre temperature. So that's going to be a fascinating new facet of how the teams have to look after their tyres into 2022. Sticking with 2022, Ferrari has stated that it has now shifted 90 to 95% of its focus to next season, which is really interesting when you consider that they are in the thick of this fight with McLaren over third in the Constructors' Championship, and arguably over the last round in Spain, and possibly even before that, looked to have taken a step forward to be leading that upper midfield battle and that battle for third in the Constructors' Championship. McLaren, meanwhile, have said that they aren't done yet with upgrades on their 2021 Challenger. They will still be bringing them to the next few races as they move to sort of keep that battle going with Ferrari and progress on into the season. McLaren being very much the topic of conversation and very much the focal point of conversation over the last week in Formula One. A bunch of written journalists were invited to Woking for a sort of a press junket earlier in the week, actually to McLaren's old base in Woking. Nobody was allowed to say what they'd been told, what they had been discussing while they were there. I didn't know, I wasn't there. But no, alas, it was not a return to Le Mans with a hypercar or anything like that, as some of us had allowed our minds to wonder. It is instead only a livery. Only a livery. It's only a bloody Gulf livery. It's beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous race livery, sort of the classic Gulf livery, a deal that was done between Gulf and McLaren some time ago, really sort of hitting all the right notes for a special one-off livery for Monaco. No, the race overalls aren't right. If you're looking at a classic Gulf livery, it should just be plain white overalls with the two stripes. But in terms of the car, it's an absolute stunner, an absolute peach. And there are the naysayers. Oh, what a waste of time. And they shouldn't be wasting their time on that when they should be trying to win race. The different department, man. Oh, but in a budget cap. Marketing's not covered by the budget cap. I like it. I'm not a cynic. I love the retro livery, and it's got a lot of fans talking about, Darlington with NASCAR, the throwback liveries. How cool would that be for an F1 weekend? Just an F1 throwback weekend. Well, it's got everyone talking. It's a beautiful livery, and can't wait to see it on track in Monaco. Now, as we said, Indycar had a brilliant race weekend in Indianapolis at the start of their month of May, which obviously is Indy 500 month coming up, and always starts with the Indy GP on the old F1 circuit that sort of winds its way through the infield and runs the wrong way around the oval at Indianapolis. Romain Grosjean, the Phoenix himself, in just his third IndyCar weekend, took pole and looked on it, honestly, all weekend. Romain saying that the Indy GP circuit felt to him like the most kind of F1 track, F1 style track that he'd driven so far in an IndyCar, helping him perhaps to get up to speed a little bit quicker than at some of the other ones, but he looked phenomenal. He led more than half the laps of the race, looked totally comfortable all the way through, apart from one small but critical area of race strategy. But ultimately he didn't take the win. That win instead going to Rinus VeeKay for Ed Carpenter Racing. But Grosjean impressed everybody with his drive. The one part that he has to still get his head around is when he's overtaking traffic. Obviously used to years and years of being a Formula One driver, and himself being a driver at the back of the field that's shown the blue flags. In IndyCar, you have the right to defend, to stay on the lead lap, and that's something that Romain, I think, either wasn't anticipating or hadn't quite got to grips with, just how forcefully you have to drive against racers who have the right to defend their place on the lead lap. It was a great race, though, a brilliant race. And we shouldn't just focus on Grosjean, because VK, just 20 years of age, the world at his feet, a really talented young guy, really talented racing driver, and brilliant for Ed Carpenter Racing, their home track in Indianapolis. And just good news all around. And another new winner for Indycar. Their third new winner this season after Patricio O'Ward and Alex Palau. So great stuff there. Also, obviously over the weekend, the support races, the junior categories, Indy Lights, Linus Lundqvist and David Malukas both had wins at IMS, but it's Malukas who tops the standings by 11 points, I think, after 6 races. Britain's Toby Sowery had a great weekend as well, with 2 podiums, and he's now moved ahead of Alex Peroni and sits just behind Kyle Kirkwood in the Indy Lights Championship standings. Meanwhile, Petrov and Rasmussen won in US Indy Pro 2000, and I'll try and get this right. Brandon Aves leads that championship. But in USF 2000, a really brilliant weekend for Sundaramurthy saw him take 2 wins to now lead the USF 2000 championship. Did I get that all right? I hope I got that all right. IMSA now, and an absolute thriller of a race as Ricky Taylor and Philippe Albuquerque held on to beat Felipe Nasr and Pipo Derani after what had been honestly a brilliant tussle, a brilliant race. Ultimately, it came down to fuel in the last few laps and a sort of a strategic battle. But Taylor and Albuquerque in the Acura beating the Cadillac in the DPI. Brilliant racing as Ollie Jarvis and Harry Ticknell brought their Mazda home in third. Fraga and Robinson were victorious in LMP3 for Riley Motorsports, but in the GTs, Albelin and Foley won for Turner Motorsports in their BMW. ELMS now, the European Le Mans Series, and a second successive win of the season for the WRT team, fronted of course by Robert Kubica, Delatraz and Yifei, at a rain-soaked Red Bull Ring LMP2. Honours went to the number 25 G-Drive car, with Roberto Merri, I think in particular, showing absolute class in the torrential conditions. LMP3 went to the number 19 Ligier after a late penalty for cool racing, and in the GTEs it looked like Iron Lynx Ferrari were going to dominate the entire thing until the rain fell, leaving AF Course to pick up the pieces. They duly took the win in the number 88 Ferrari 488. In the World Endurance Championship, Glickenhaus has finally announced its drivers for its sole entry for the next race in Portimao. It will be Romain Dumas, it will be Ryan Briscoe, and it will be Richard Westbrook. Sad news to report in the DTM, as news came through right at the start of this week that Volker Nosek, who led pretty much the last 2 decades of Audi's participation in the DTM, had died after a very short but very serious illness, aged just 59. In NASCAR, Alex Bowman became only the second driver this year to have won a second NASCAR Cup race, leading home a 1-2-3-4 at Dover for Hendrick Motorsports. He led the last 98 laps to defeat Kyle Larson, with Elliott third and Byron fourth. MotoGP now, and as we said, a wet and wild weekend at Le Mans, which saw Jack Miller win despite taking 2 long lap penalties. Astonishing ride from him. The race started dry, then the rain fell, and the decision was taken, for the first time since Brno 2017 actually, that it would be a flag-to-flag race, meaning that it wouldn't be stopped. They would have to come in, pit and change bikes mid-race, which everybody did. There were penalties, there were mistakes, there were crashes, there's controversy. Valentino Rossi saying it was completely the wrong choice to flag it. But Miller, through it all, drove absolutely heroically for the win. Fabio Quartararo leads the championship now by a single point, with Mugello next on the calendar. In Moto2, Raul Fernandez converted his pole to victory as Sam Lowes crashed. But Remy Gardner brought his bike home second in order to keep his championship lead by just 1 point. And in Moto3, Sergio Garcia dominated the weekend to move up to second in the championship, with championship leader Pedro Acosta crashing. However, he managed to remount and ride his bike home to 8th, which means he extends his championship lead, sitting on 103 points to Garcia's 49. And finally, if you ever wondered what happened to your favourite Brazilian Formula One drivers, in fact, if you ever wondered what happened to most Brazilian drivers, full stop, look no further than the Brazilian Stock Car Championship, which you really should hunt out. And if you can find a stream of it, watch it. It's not easy, but if you can find it, do. It's cracking racing. And the entry list is insane. It's, Rubens Barrichello and Ricardo Zonta and Felipe Massa and Tony Kanaan and Nelson Piquet Jr. and guys from Junior Formula, I remember like Diego Nunez, and great races. Absolutely astonishing. And it's remiss of me not to talk about it all the time because it's a really fun championship and it's really great racing. But the reason I'm doing so is because this weekend Antonio Felix da Costa, reigning Formula E champion, turned up to Interlagos for the 2 races there. And he went and won, didn't he, in the second race? Astonishing. That success, though, places him quite incredibly in the championship order absolutely nowhere. Ineligible for points. So just turned up, won the race, 0 points. But I love it. Just went over and absolutely crushed it. So brilliant job from Da Costa. Great championship. If you haven't heard of it or you haven't seen it, search it out, give it a look, because it's great fun racing, and it's a good crowd, it's a good crack, and get yourself in on Brazilian stock cars. And that's about it, folks, for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. As I said, sorry it's a slightly shorter version than it normally is, but with Monaco taking place at the weekend, everything moves a day earlier, and so not as much time to get this thing put together and put to bed. But we will be back next week after the Monaco Grand Prix and all of the happenings from the next 7 days of motorsport. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. Please come back and join us next week for the next episode of This Week